Shavua Tov, everyone, and Shana Tova. I assume you and yours will be inscribed for a good, healthy, and sweet year on Rosh Hashana, in the Jewish year 5783, and we'll be locked in for it as well on Yom Kippur, the week after. I translated and adapted this story from the book Good V'Voch by Avram Barash, and I retitled it to Giving Credit Where Credit's Not Due. There was a wealthy man in the town of Kovno named Shraga Feivel Frank. A prominent businessman once approached him for a substantial loan, naming a date by which he expected to repay it. But Shraga Feivel cheerfully lent him the money. After some time passed, however, the loan was due, but the man did not come to repay it. Shraga Feivel said nothing about it, as was his practice in such cases. However, at one point he himself needed a certain sum of money, and his wife Golda remembered that this businessman owed them a large debt. She herself approached the man and requested that he repay the money, telling him that they needed it, and she had knowledge that he was able to do so. The man brazenly refused her request, answering with such impertinence that the insulted woman returned home very upset. With much effort, her husband calmed her down, but the incident was far from over. Some months later, the businessman appeared at the Frank home, but not with the money he owed. He told Shraga Feivel that he wished to borrow more money, and promised to pay that as well as the first sum by a certain date. Taken aback by this impudence, this chutzpah, Rabbi Shraga Feivel told the man he would have to consider the matter before replying, and would inform him later of his decision. When Mrs. Frank heard of her husband's temerity, she asked her husband incredulously, "How could you even consider such a thing after you were so unreliable the first time, and behaved with such ingratitude and chutzpah? I'm sure you'll never see this money either." "My dear wife," replied Rav Shraga Feivel, "are we any better than this man? Every year on Rosh Hashana, we ask God to forgive our sins and accept our prayers. We always say earnestly, 'Master of the universe, this year will be good.' But we backslide and sin again the next year. Then how can we come to ask Him once again to forgive us? What happened this past year? Didn't we come to Him last year with the same request and the same promise? But now I can really say it. This Jew borrowed money and also promised to pay it back. But instead of repaying me, he asked to borrow more, and I will give it to him. I will now have some merit in the eyes of God, that He should do the same for me, measure for measure, just as I have done for this man." In the face of such logic, Golda could only nod her head in agreement to extend the loan. And we, too, should nod our heads and forgive anyone and everyone, even though we, of course, are right, and they, of course, are wrong. And then, like the man in the story said, we will now, quote, "we will now have some merit in the eyes of God, that He should do the same for us, measure for measure, just as we have done."